is pretty good. A couple of sections here. Quote from Martin Luther, German reformer: "None can believe how powerful prayer is and what it is able to effect, but those who have learned it by experience." You can't, as I understand it, fly a plane by reading a book on being a pilot. Part of the deal is you have to actually get behind the, whatever that thing is, and have the instruction, get some hands-on thing. That's the way it is with prayer, really. He says, "It is a great matter when in extreme need to take hold on prayer. I know whenever I have prayed earnestly that I have been amply heard and have obtained more than I prayed for. God indeed sometimes delayed, but at last he came." Especially people like Luther, that I think were in a special place of history, God moving something to a different situation completely, being the point man for God in these things. These men often were put through very deep, trying circumstances, and really, like David being pursued for his life, cried out to God. And God heard them. God showed himself to be strong, because God, dare I say it this way, needed them to recognize that he was there, that he is the answer of those that diligently seek him. Well, two thoughts tonight. The open recompense. If we do not expect to receive answers to our requests, our whole conception of prayer is at fault. This isn't just giving yourself a good talking to when you go to prayer. The word prayer means asking. John R. Rice had a book called Prayer, Asking and Receiving. Now, I think he went too far, because we find that a lot of prayer is adoration and all kinds of other things. But he was right in that at the essence, it's asking. And the promise is that to the degree we find out and are in God's will, then we end up receiving it. There is no surer and plainer mark of trifling in prayer than when men are careless what they get by prayer. If you stop to think about it, if you're asking for something that doesn't really matter, that is just trifling in prayer, just playing at prayer. Old Puritan, I believe, Richard Sibbes, said, "We should watch daily, continue instant in prayer, strengthen our supplications with arguments from God's word and promises, and mark how our prayers speed. When we shoot an arrow, we look to its fall. When we send a ship to sea, we look for its return. When we sow, we look for an harvest. It is atheism to pray and not to wait in hope." That's just talking. That's just talking to yourself. A sincere Christian will pray, wait, strengthen his heart with the promises, and never leave praying and looking up till God gives him a gracious answer. And if the answer is delayed, we ought to ask ourselves if that which we desire is truly according to the will of God. And if we are satisfied that it is, we ought to continue instant in prayer. Well, then, concerning this thing of being according to the will of God, the author says, we ought not to doubt that those prayers that are according to the will of God shall have a full answer. Why should we not doubt? For with regard to them we rest our confidence on the word and name of Christ. He promised that. So we're not going to doubt that. But there are many requests concerning which we do not easily come to full assurance. You may be asking some things for the here and now, that they do not stand so clearly in the divine will as to yield us certainty. That is to say, I hope this is God's will. It's certainly my will. But even Jesus himself in Gethsemane prayed for something that God did not give him. And at the end, he was satisfied to say, not my will, but thine be done. That's where we need to be. The Apostle Paul sought the Lord thrice that this thorn, which rankled in his flesh, might be withdrawn. But the only response assured was, my grace is sufficient for thee. I can get you through the problem. John, did I miss one? No, yeah, John, the beloved disciple, encourages us to pray. I'm sorry, I missed the first one. Moses desired to pass over Jordan with the tribes, but Jehovah said to him, speak no more unto me in this matter. Then the example of Paul. God says, no, I'm not going to take it away. My grace is sufficient. Now, John, the beloved disciple, encourages us to pray for the salvation of our brethren. But even as we address ourselves to this holy duty, he reminds us there is a sin unto death, in which he says, I do not say you should pray for that. We're not quite sure what that means, but it may be that it's just clearly God's will that death is the recompense of this person's actions. We may indeed be sure that whatsoever is good for God's children, they shall have it. Now, this good is from God's point of view, not yours. I asked my grandson Samuel to be my candy man on Sunday and to pass them out. My wife and my daughter were cleaning up his bed there, and there were a bunch of candy wrappers there. Finally, he got them all together, and he had an entire handful of candy wrappers. So the candy man had helped himself quite a bit. And he's not even supposed to have candy because he's wearing braces. It makes it very difficult to clean the teeth. Whatever is good for God's children, they shall receive it, for all is theirs to help them toward heaven. Therefore, if poverty be good, they shall have it. If disgrace or crosses be good, they shall have them. For all is ours to promote our greatest prosperity. The verse that people love to quote is in Romans 8. All things work together for good to those that love God. And people, looking at it saying, wait a minute, some things happened to me that weren't good. But you missed the definition of good. He goes on to say that the purpose of God is to conform you to the image of Christ. That's the good.
An amputation gets the job done.
What's that?
I said if an amputation gets the job done.
That's right. There are things in the life of Christ that are harsh, disappointing, humiliating, heartbreaking, and we are to be conformed to the image of Christ. We should not assume that that means peaches and cream at every meal. He concludes, we must be careful not to confound, to mix up, the yearnings of nature, what you want, with the promptings of the Spirit. The Spirit will never lead you contrary to His word. Only those whose eye is single, whose whole body therefore is full of light, can safely distinguish between the impulses of the flesh and the leading of the Spirit. Subject to this caution, we may very often derive encouragement from the fervor of our petitions. This is what God has told us, that He wants us to continue praying, be fervent in prayer, really mean it when you pray. We've talked about this before, that when our children were coming up to Christmas, they wanted everything. There was a toy catalog. They wanted everything. I want this and this and this and this. But we knew that that was just the general wishing. So we were listening and watching and noticing that if they mentioned something over and over again, that was the real wish. That was the thing we were interested in. I think God must be the same way. When it comes down to it, we need to understand what would be a pleasant dessert and what is really needed in our life. And going to Him, that's the will of God.